Good morning. It's October 29th, 2023, and I'm recording this in just outside of Cambridge in the United Kingdom. The theme for today's video is on writing as a contemplative practice. How can writing connect us with the deepest part of who we are? How can it connect us with true nature? My intention is to provide my perspective on how contemplative writing can function in that way. And particularly to link and focus this exploration of contemplative writing around the practice of ally work. You can think of this practice of ally work as a dialogic, a relational form of being in converse with the special face of the divine or the real or the source of being that is accessible to us. So we're going to explore how writing as a contemplative technology can help us encounter and receive guidance from that source of being as we face it. Also can call that our true nature. So how can contemplative writing connect us to that? How can we learn in that process of engagement, of dialogue, of converse? And then how do we integrate those learnings in our real world manifest life? So I'm going to focus on 10 reasons or perspectives on how writing functions in its contemplative capacity. So if you were to explore the work of Dr. John Vervaeke, the cognitive scientist at the University of Toronto, who is also exploring the practice of ally work, you would see, particularly in his series on awakening from the meaning crisis, he uses frequently the term psychotechnology. Psychotechnology, one word. An example of a psychotechnology, what he does is in that series, he goes through the course of human history from pre-civilization up to the present day. And along the way, over that timeline, he will name particular psychotechnologies and how their development transformed the experience of what it means to be human, who we are, how we function, how we relate, how we understand ourselves. One of those psychotechnologies, one, for example, could be the capacity to develop an attentional practice. Imagine sitting around the fire 100,000 years ago and how, as humans, directed their attention to the fire in that contemplative stillness, how that capacity for developing focus and presence led to the psychotechnology of meditation, or what we might call mindfulness, or focused attention. So that would be a psychotechnology. And these things are changing the brain, changing how we relate. Another would have been the development of language, of course, of communication. And another would have been writing. So if we think of writing as a psychotechnology, in its emergence approximately 7,000 years ago, first through symbolic characters, such as hieroglyphics, and then into alphabetical forms. This was completely transformative for civilization, for human history. So this is, writing is a technology. And so I wanted to emphasize that at the start, because in the contemporary modern world, so many of us, including myself, may be so accustomed to writing as a functional form of life that we forget that this is an incredible, powerful technology. And so this practice of ally work is applying that technology, directing it in our intention and attention to the cultivation of our inner relationship with what we could call our true self or the divine. So first, just to name writing as a technology. And then second, to identify technology as akin to a form of magic. I forget who said it, some technologist, where they referred to any advanced form of technology as essentially being indistinguishable from magic. So when I use that word magic, I want to invoke a dimension of mystery. Even when we use the word technology, we might understand technology in a certain limited capacity, whether it is through modern communications technology or like material inventions. But I want to bring that dimension of technology back to perhaps that word that Vervaeke uses of a psychotechnology. What he names about psychotechnologies is they are adaptive. They might start out functioning in one way and then over time come to be incorporated in a whole new domains. So this is a magic of the psychotechnology of writing. We might have first developed it in some functional capacities, let's say for recording laws or transactions. But as humans continue to engage with that psychotechnology, it can then transform in the way we're engaging with it to cultivate new dimensions of it and us. So naming that aspect of magic, of mystery in the way we relate to writing, which is so important for ally work, because we're directly entering through the form, through this core form of ally work practice of writing, we're directly entering into the mystery, into what we could call a place of magic. The third aspect of writing as a contemplative practice, I want to name it as an embodied practice. We might be so accustomed to thinking of writing and literacy as being an abstract process, the symbolic form of letters, the cognitive brain function and brain processes that, which is fairly demanding tasking on the brain, the process of writing, the process of reading. So when we think about literacy in these typical ways, we might think of it as a form of abstraction. And there have even been people who have made the argument that the forms of abstraction that came through literacy have removed us from, let's say, the sensory, the sensuous world. David Abrams has made that argument. And I want to push back on that a little. And I think this practice of ally work is a pushing back on that conception of literacy as something that divides us from the sensuous world, from what we might call nature. I think it's the intimacy of ally work as an applied psychotechnology through writing. It very much brings us into relationship with the sensuous. And so this is this third point that I wanted to emphasize, is that contemplative writing is an embodied practice. It's not just some abstract mental process. In this practice of ally work, first there's a listening, an opening. We're settling ourselves into a form of stillness, of receptivity, and there's an openness, there's a receptivity, there's a listening in this dialogic relationship with what we could call true self, or the special face of the divine, or the ally. I sit, I develop some preparedness for receptivity. All of this is highly embodied, right? I'm coming into presence, I'm coming into the body. Relative to other ways I'm functioning in my daily life, ally work is a highly embodied practice. When we listen for the symbolic, imaginal forms through which we are in dialogic, reciprocal relationship with the ally, we are then taking that listening, converting it through the written mode of our arm, of our hand. We're, in a sense, transmitting that receptivity from the brain through the arm onto the page. Highly embodied. If you wanted to get a really interesting perspective on this, you could read Gloria Anzaldua's work. And she really, because she's also in relationship to the work of Hillman and Corban, she is articulating this relationship, which I see as her articulating the relationship with the ally, as through writing in this very, very embodied form. And so hers is a great resource if you want to, let's say, have a more feminist perspective, or a a Mexican-American, even an indigenous perspective on ally work, written practice as an embodied way of connecting to spirit, to deep culture. Okay, so we've got this third focus, contemplative writing as an embodied practice. For me, I want to enter into this fourth dimension around ally work and contemplative writing, this fourth perspective. For me, what's so valuable about ally work is we can connect it very strongly to the heart of contemplative wisdom traditions. That's really important to me. There are many what we could call new age or new thought practices that kind of exist in their own space. And so there's a lot of differentiation in terms of practices in the new age or new thought space, but there's not necessarily like a lot of linkage into the tradition. For me, that's really important because as what I could call a contemplative scientist and a contemplative researcher, we want to have some kind of common language, some kind of common understanding of how we are collectively developing and where we might be going. And so to be able to connect ally work to our heritage, our human heritages and traditions, our contemplative traditions, it's really important to me. So for me to be able to identify throughout wisdom traditions where ally work, how it's functioning, what its ontology is, what its understanding of the structure of being is, it's really important for me to be able to see like ally work as I see it appearing in these different traditions, so that it's not just some new, let's say, disconnected way of understanding things. We want to really be able to create like a field of dialogue and converse. So just like within our ally practice itself, if we think of it as this vertical personal conversation with the divine, we also want to have this horizontal conversation between traditions, because collectively, for me, ally work is a way very broadly to cultivate the human connection with the divine, to receive the personalized, differentiated insight, but also to have a collective shared conversation about that for how we together are moving forward into the future. That was a little riff there. That's something I'm passionate about. So as I'm talking about ally work's connection to the tradition and how I see it appearing, or how I see ally work in a sense as a distillation of some of these deep mysticisms and different traditions, I want to give an example. And so one of the traditions that I feel there's a very vibrant, alive dialogue, if we bring it into dialogue with ally practice, is the mystical Islamic tradition. A huge window to that tradition for me is through the work of Ibn Arabi, the 13th century mystic, born in Spain, died in Syria. Now, Ibn Arabi's work is a deep reflection, unpacking of the Quran, the teachings that came through Muhammad, the word of God in that tradition. And throughout Ibn Arabi's writings, we will see this motif of the pen and the tablet. The pen and the tablet. Imagine like a layer cake with all of these different levels of being that the divine brought into creation. Some are totally beyond our capacity to perceive. They're like the essence of the divine is transcendent. And then we have, let's say, subtle layers of this layer cake, layers of spirit or light. And then lower down, we have more gross or manifest layers, more visible layers, such as the sensory world. One way to understand all of these layers together and how they are interlinked and interrelated is that between each layer, there is a reciprocal dialogic relationship that is symbolized by the pen and the tablet. So just to be a little simplified here, let's say between layer 1, closer to the top, and layer 2, layer 1 functions as the pen, layer 2 functions as the tablet. The pen is writing on the tablet. Layer 2, as the tablet, is receiving, let's say, information, light, from the pen above it. Then we go to layer 3. Layer 2 is now functioning as that pen writing on layer 3. So we go down and down and down into the manifest visible world. I'm not going to make a argument here, but I'm going to make I'm going to be a little creative here and say we could even think metaphorically of the way DNA functions for human beings as being like a pen that is then writing on the tablet of material form. So you can see that we could even start to identify some of the things that we know about these different layers and understand them as aspects of pen and tablet. The DNA is like the pen, the information bank that is then writing on the material of our cells, of the way we are developed and individuated biologically. Okay, so again, the intention of this fourth perspective is to name the way in which we can see these deep motifs and symbols that are core to ally work in the wisdom traditions, the pen and the tablet being a very, very beautiful example of that. That is why I'm so lit up by studying the Islamic tradition, because it is a tradition that has particularly, it just has a lot of particular resonances with ally practice. And of course, Jeffrey Raff points that out in his book, The Practice of Ally Work, particularly in his speaking about Ibn Arabi. He said it's about the closest thing that he has encountered in any tradition to what he understands ally work to be. Okay, let's leave it at that for this fourth point. Number 5, words are sacred. This is the point of view for number 5. Words are sacred. Now, you will find this understanding throughout spiritual traditions. Today, in contemporary form, we have so many texts, so many words. The internet, we're just overwhelmed with information and words. And so, in a sense, words have lost their sacredness. But throughout wisdom traditions, the word is often identified with the very source of creation, the very emergence of this non-manifest essence into form. What comes first? The word. The word. So before there's even any matter, there is the word. Just like Just like at the physical, biological level, the letters of DNA are the words or the blueprints that form the bodies. In this deep originating spiritual sense, the letters, the words are the spiritual blueprints for what comes into being. So when we're engaged in contemplative writing, when we're engaged in the practice of ally work, we are actually kind of like dissolving the layers of conditioning in which we see words of having lost value and meaning. And we're starting to re-infuse meaning into words. We're starting to feel words as alive again, as bearers of meaning, as bearers of our connection to the divine, to our origin. One recent tradition that I encountered, which has a very strong emphasis on words as being sacred, is from the Japanese Shinto tradition. Recently picked up an academic book on that subject, which I look forward to exploring more. Very, very global, this understanding of words as sacred. The sixth perspective I wanted to touch on is the way that contemplative writing functions as a process of connecting to our unique or differentiated relationship with true self. With our special face, with our private face to the divine. If we are in converse with this true self, we are in connection with it, how do we build dialogue with it? Not just recognize it as being real, but how do we be in relational dialogue with it? And what happens? What do we learn when we are in relational dialogue with it? What we learn is it has unique insights and guidance for us. So empowering. Very easy in our contemporary global civilization to feel a deep sense of separation, a deep lack of self-worth. It's very empowering, gives a deep sense of belonging to be in this dialogic process of ally work and to feel a unique sense through our receptivity of communication that is speaking directly to us, to our hearts, to us as unique beings. Each of us, we could say, are unique, differentiated expressions of the divine. How do we honor that uniqueness? By opening our hearts to receive that which reflects our uniqueness, our unique connection to the divine. As Ibn Arabi would say, these tajalli, these insights from the divine, they are coming down on us like rain, like rain. Just picture that. We often feel isolated, separated, no connection, no sense of belonging. And he's saying, actually, he might say, my number's wrong, but he might say that there's 70,000 of these divine rains, these rains of insights are coming down on us each day. That is like a treasure. It's like an incredible bounty. It's a generous gift of this source. Alloy work is a very, very, very simple way to open up to this if we have the preparedness for that. Through conveyed, encapsulated within these unique differentiated insights is the information that guides us on our way. We each have our unique ways. We each have our unique purposes, callings, and destinies. These insights contain information on how to actualize our uniqueness, our differentiation, how are we to be of service. In that aspect or value of service is all bound up in this, because this whole process, this whole practice is a practice of the heart. And this heart is all about service. It's not about me. It's not about me, this individualized, separate notion of me as something apart or egoic or trying to meet this me's needs. No, this is about our interconnection. This is about a sense of our unity. And so this heart openness, this receptivity, receiving these insights on my purpose, my destiny, is my purpose in service to a larger good. So we don't want to overlook that. Okay, so that's the sixth thing. Seventh thing I want to name is what's really nice about writing as a contemplative practice, particularly as I'm referring to it in relation to ally work. Now, let me say it simply. Writing gives us like a shared language, a shared way to reflect on this process with each other. If for you, this converse or dialogue with the divine was through gardening, and somebody else was through dancing, and somebody else was through I don't know, like drugs, like psychedelic drugs, like those might all be very personally meaningful. But this psychotechnology of writing gives us like a shared foundation that is very simple, very accessible. It's more universal in quality than, let's say, like dancing. I'm not someone who's like that comfortable dancing. But this capacity for literacy and writing, it just has like more universal, I feel, this is my personal opinion, but I feel like it has a sort of universal functionality. It's a literacy, it's a language that we share. We might have all different other layers and aspects of ways we develop this relationship, this converse, this dialogue with the divine. But I feel like writing is a really good way to bring us together around that. Not the only way, but a really good way. Remember, as Vervaeke would say, psychotechnologies are exaptive. They can be developed in new domains once they come into our being. And so the way that through ally work, writing can be a highly focused way of developing our relationship with the divine, I feel like it's not just, again, I mentioned this earlier, but it's not just how we are doing that, it's how we together are doing that. So writing links us vertically and brings us into dialogue, develops a field horizontally. it's a shared language. This emergent sense that I have around ally work. It's not just a practice. It's not even a relationship. It's also a shared language. It might be a strange thing to say, that this practice of ally work is a shared language. We think of languages as like German or French, Italian, or what have you. But you think of those languages, they are not completely universal. They're identified with culture. What if ally work, in a sense, metaphorically, is like a universal shared language? And writing is a core foundation to cultivate that shared language. This may or may not land for you what I'm sharing about right now, but it's something that feels very alive for me. And I'll probably explore that more in another video. The eighth thing I want to talk about is building literacy. Ally work is a way of building literacy with this converse with the divine. I've been touching on this. One thing I want to name is that depending on our cultural and spiritual traditions that we are part of, some of us are going to have more literacy and some of us are going to have less literacy in terms of our connection or communication to the divine. That's just how it is. We might say that some indigenous cultures have a very high literacy in that connection with the divine. For me, who grew up in a fairly secular culture, you could say that I had a lower level of literacy. By way of analogy, part of my work in the world has been in the education sector through mindfulness in education. I worked in a school district that had a particularly progressive, it was a little bit ahead of its time in terms of developing equity practices in the school systems. And so one of the concepts that I learned about was about racial literacy. So for example, and not to make absolutes, but for example, for me, as someone who grew up in like more of like a white Anglo-American culture, I didn't necessarily have a high racial literacy around the way that racism impacts the lived experience of human beings. I wasn't necessarily like educated or literate in my understanding. That's something I've been cultivating and working on. And again, not to be absolute, but I will generalize and say that some of my, let's say, peers, people that I'm connected to, that I'm close with, other contemplatives, for example, contemplatives who are persons of color. I'm thinking particularly, for example, given that I most often live in the United States, some of the folks I'm close to who are Black Americans, these folks that I know, from my point of view, have a particularly high racial literacy. This is something they have had to navigate because of the racism, the racist culture and systems they've lived within. And so they've, through their, in a sense, engagement and realities of having to navigate that, they've developed like a high understanding of how that functions, higher level of racial literacy. So I use that analogy again to come back to this literacy of our relationship to our converse with the divine. Some of us have higher and lower levels of that. This is why ally work is so important to me, because it's a recognition that that is a true fact. And to me, ally work is a way to increase that literacy. which I think is essential for all of the crises we are facing, including the climate crisis, which is a kind of separation from our sense of responsibility and connection to the planet Earth, our sense of connection and responsibility to all life. It's that lack of literacy, that feeling of separation, which perpetuates that, you could say, like oppression of ecosystems. It's really important to me that we have shared languages that can develop this literacy. Again, some people who have a really high literacy may not be so interested in ally work as a practice, but there are many, many people like me who can really benefit from increasing their literacy. And I feel like ally work has the qualities of being very, very simple and accessible, but also very, very deep in its potential to develop that literacy, especially as we in community start to develop shared conversation around it. Again, it has that capacity for both the personal and the collective to develop together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The ninth thing that I want to focus on around contemplative writing, particularly in relationship to ally work, is how in that space of dialogue, learning happens, but not just learning and then the process stops, but learning that then moves us towards integration, to living our insights, to living our understanding, to living our values. Jeffrey Raff puts a high emphasis on this in his work. This isn't just about connecting with the ally, learning from the ally for the sake of learning. This is about integrating these learnings into our life. This is the move from realization to actualization through our unique differentiated beings. It's fantastic, so exciting. We have a way to have access to differentiated insights that are unique to us, and then we can then put those into lived existence. It's amazing. I am so excited as this literacy develops for what might happen. Like, all of these problems in the world are functions of our conditioned, limited thinking minds. What happens when we access these deeper insights and put them into practice? This is so much more like powerful than AI. AI is just a mirror of our like conditioned mind in a sense. Now that's a bit rude to say about AI. It has much more value than that. But part of it is true. It's a reflection of our limited knowledge. Whereas the ally work, the insights in ally work, it's just like a much higher level, this kind of like divine insight than like the human realm of in which AI is like a mirror of. Now, that's a little bit reductive about AI. I think there's going to be a beautiful complementary relationship between AI as a technology and this divine insight once we can start to like have a nice balance between them. So for example, how do we understand AI, artificial intelligence, as guided by divine insight? There's a very simple way to look at it. All right, that's the ninth thing. The last thing for today, I'm sure I could go on, but the 10th thing that I want to highlight is the dialogical aspect that we can enter into writing. So as John Vervaeke names in the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series, and this is fascinating to me. And actually, to be fair, it may not be particularly from the series. I'm particularly remembering it from his conversation with Charles Stang, in which they're discussing Charles Stang's book, The Divine Double, which is another name for the ally. And what Vervaeke talks about is how cognitive science is in this new place in which is starting to have whole new conceptions of who we are, what the self is. And it's not this Cartesian, egoic, separative form of individual self. It's much more a complex and relational form of self. So if we think of ourself, one part of the self is what we more typically might think of as me. We could say the personality, but in a deeper sense, we could even say like us as like soul, some kind of more spiritual sense of who we are in a differentiated way. But then there's also this ally aspect of ourself, sort of deeper or more foundational, more essential, true self. And so there's already, even just with these two, now we can see there's not a monological self, there's a dialogical self. So we have these two aspects to who we are. We can consciously bring them into relationship, bring them into dialogue. This is what ally practice is. It's the dialogue of, you could say, this is how I think of it. It's kind of like our personality comes into it, but in a deeper sense, it is like our soul, our individuated spiritual form that then is in dialogue with this more essential form of ourself. It's like the DNA for this differentiation, the ally. And we bring those two into converse, and writing is the very simple way we do that. It's so simple. Like, it's so exciting. I always feel like the most beautiful contemplative practices often can have some element of simplicity. It's like mindfulness. It's so freaking simple, but yet it's had incredibly powerful, exactive, right? It's a psychotechnology that has been developed and applied to new contexts. That's what this ally work is. It's so simple at its core practice, but so powerful in its implications. It is the way to ground in an embodied form this dialogic relationship between the me in this spiritual sense and the ally, this more encompassing sense of who I am, this true self, so to speak. I'm never going to get, there's no definitive word or name for the ally. In a sense, the ally is a name for this thing we are pointing to, that we know through this participatory relational practice, for example, called ally work. So this contemplative writing, this ally work, is like so naturally fitted for this dialogical form. It's you know, it's, if you were to just analyze ally work through visible empirical science, you might have a hard time like getting the cognitive understanding. But all you got to do is start rolling into it, doing it. If you feel the preparedness and the groundedness and the readiness for it, and it will emerge, because it's not this isn't something that is, if we truly understand it, and hopefully if you engage in the practice, the understanding will come to you, because you're conforming, you're fitting yourself to a real structure of being. And when we talk about ally practice, it makes it sound like we're making something up or we're inventing something. But no, we're just finding a way to connect to what is already real and true, functionally, structurally, relationally, dialogically, all of the ways I could talk about it. So I know I'm really jazzed about it. And thank you for allowing me to riff for a little while here about what lights me up and ways that I see contemplative writing and ally practice. So just sending you much appreciations and my heartfelt blessings and well wishes to you. Thank you.